Stay to the end of the video because I promise you're going to shave strokes off your next round. So I just played in a tournament with horrible conditions. It was like 29 to 30 degrees outside, but not only that, it was like 20 plus mile per hour winds the entire round. Your most stable disc becomes your most unstable disc. The putting green is a treacherous place, and the guy who won only gained 3 rating points when he beat someone who was 1,006 rated, and they lost 9 rating points. Now, nobody shot under par the entire day. My first round, I shot 8 over, and the course that we played on, I shot like -2 during my practice round. And when I did my practice round, it was like 45, 50 plus degrees. It was a nice day, not very windy, and I felt like I actually left some out there. So to go and shoot +8, you can just tell that the conditions were crazy. No one was playing like amazing. If someone got a birdie, it was crazy because people were bogeying every hole. You know, double bogey, not very uncommon. And the guy who won was probably the shortest arm in the whole group of MPO. But what he did is something we're about to talk about right now. So why was everyone shooting crazy over par? Now, before we get into that, this video is going to be super helpful if you're competing in a place like this where, you know, it's kind of the end of winter time. There's no leaves on any of the trees. It's going to be windy every time you play. And courses that aren't typically windy are all of a sudden extra windy right now. Like right now, I can feel the wind blowing in, and it's not even supposed to be windy today. So most of the MPO aren't going to be missing from about this distance where they know they can just tap it in every single time. But you take a couple more steps back, it's blowing wind, and all of a sudden, they miss this. It's only a couple more steps back, but then they throw it too high or they airball. Something's going on, and let me tell you how you can fix it. So I think these missed putts and uncertainty in the wind stems from past experiences where you know you've thrown a putt and it was barely too high and it soars over the basket. It's like 50 feet long by the time you get to it, and then you miss that putt and it ends up being a couple more strokes. So what happens is more experienced players, maybe they're very good at the game, maybe not pro tour level, but MPO players, they'll step up to a putt, they'll be about 35 feet away, and they'll start feeling the headwind, so their brain tells them, okay, lay off on this putt. Still, you're gonna go for it, but you're gonna lay off on this putt. And what happens every single time, unless they're lucky, is basically they're going to not throw the putt as hard. It's gonna start being kind of lofty. It's gonna hit the band, or they might just airball it. They're probably not gonna make that putt if their instincts kind of kick in and they think, okay, I'm gonna lay off this putt. Or if it wasn't windy, they just step up to the putt, they'd line up, and they'd throw it at that same amount of power that they normally do from about 30, 35 feet, and they're either gonna make it or it's gonna chain out and be really close. So I've got 3 different solutions based on the wind conditions on how you can solve this the next time you have to putt in a situation like that. But before we get into that, there's 2 wind situations I think you guys need to know about. So the first wind situation is kind of a mental thing. You know it's windy, you can feel the wind, but actually it's not gonna affect your disc at all. Maybe like 1 to 2% of its flight will be affected, but it's not like you're teeing off into the wind. The wind has so much more time to affect the disc. When you're on the putting green and there's not like a blowing wind in your face, your putt is probably not actually affected. And all this calculating like, oh, it's a tailwind, I'm gonna throw it higher, or oh, it's a headwind, I better, you know, throw it low, right? But if you pick up the grass and, you know, see what's going on, it's not actually really doing anything, but you can feel it around you. In those situations, you have to tell yourself and realize that the only thing that matters is that you line up to the putt and just focus on trying to hit that pole, because your putt is actually not going to be changed at all, and it's going to be more of a mental thing just because of, you know, there's more wind in the air during this time, and it just feels like maybe there's a headwind, but in reality, it's not affecting your disc at all. Now let's move into the other situation where, seriously, you can feel a wind blowing on your face. You are nervous about this putt. You're 35 feet away. You're not sure what to do, and your brain's starting to kick in telling you to lay off this putt. So there's 2 things you can do, and the first thing is simply to lay up. If you lay up, you're only gonna have to putt 1 more time, and you actually don't have to worry about that scenario where you miss
it's a little bit high, the wind starts taking that disc, it starts fluttering, it's going off to the right, it's going off to the right, and then all of a sudden you're like 40 feet away and it's still gusting wind out there. So most likely you're not gonna make that putt either. And it's not because that you're a bad putter, it's because the conditions are really hard, and maybe even some of the best putters out there are still gonna hit the cage or miss that putt too. Unless you're really confident putter and you're feeling good that day, which honestly, you can go for it. I would suggest just lay up. All the MPO players that day of that tournament, they were missing like 15-foot putts and 15-foot putt comebackers just because of the wind, just because of, I mean, maybe because it was cold, of course, but the wind situation being uncertain for the conditions we were playing, I saw a lot of people hit the band from like 15 feet away. And on those putts that were like 30 feet or something, after a while, people started to lay up and the number of strokes they were taking were starting to go down. So even if that means taking a 4 on a 600-foot par 4, that's a lot better than being 30 feet away for your birdie putt and the wind is gusting and you throw your putt and all of a sudden it goes over the basket and now you have a comebacker that you're not necessarily going to make. Now, my other solution might be a little bit more controversial to you guys, but it's actually to ditch your putting putter just for a second and pick up something more stable or even faster to deal with the putt and just throw your normal putt. So I've got like a DX skater here, and this is kind of difficult because when you're on the putting green, there's only maybe 1 or 2 discs in your bag that you would select from about 30 feet. It's kind of odd to pick up a fairway driver or overstable mid-range and do the same putt, but something you have to realize is that probably from 30 feet away, all it's gonna do is go straight. Like you could pick up a Discmania tilt putt from 30 feet away, it's probably gonna go straight in if you line up correctly and throw your normal putt.
So the thing that this pro did really well was he didn't allow the wind mentally affect his putt. Now, there were some times where it did bite him, and he did take a bogey or a double bogey. There were a couple putts that actually flew over the basket. They ended up catching the wind. But for the most part, even though the wind was blowing around him, he didn't change his putt at all. And out of the entire field, he was the person who was least mentally affected by the wind. So he was mentally strong, and that's what allowed him to sink the most putts.
The main takeaway is the first 2 things that we talked about. The main thing for any putt, any condition, any situation is that you line up properly. So if you're not even lined up, if you're focused on, oh shoot, the wind, it's gonna take my disc away, and you're not focused on, okay, line up with the pole, right? There's a good chance that you're probably gonna airball it or hit the band or just not even be close to making it. You gotta give yourself a decent chance to make the putt, and that happens before you even throw the disc. The second thing is on those really windy situations, you know, especially like from 40 feet away, maybe throwing a Firebird is not even a good idea, right? So don't be afraid to lay up. Anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe. Comment down below what's your strategy for putting in the wind. And anyways, I'll see you in the next one.